Good evening, I'm Dominic Dezzutti.
And I'm Larry Patchett.
Together, we produce the Time Machine episodes of Colorado Inside Out.
We've been exploring Colorado's past for 10 years now. Since 2003, we've made 12 expeditions into the exciting history of our state. We also took a brief glimpse at the year 2025.
This year, we visited the year 1973, a tumultuous year on the world stage, a trying year for the nation, and a year of sometimes violent change here in Colorado. We found more stories than a half-hour show could tell.
So, we talked with community leaders who lived the stories we discovered researching CIO 1973. We decided to add their insight to the issues discussed in the show.
We hope you enjoy this extended look at Colorado in the year 1973. Be sure to visit cpt12.org, where you'll find additional stories about this pivotal year. You can also check out some of our other Emmy Award-winning Time Machine specials.
We also want to acknowledge former Governor John Vanderhoof, who passed away earlier this year. Governor Vanderhoof served as governor of Colorado starting in June of 1973. He found creative responses to unprecedented problems, and as you will see, he started Colorado down a path towards a multi-source energy future.
On behalf of the entire production team here on Colorado Inside Out, please enjoy this extended look at the issues and the stories of 1973.
This is viewer-sponsored public television serving the Front Range, KBDI TV 12, Broomfield, Colorado.
KBDI presents Colorado Inside Out. This week, we review 1973, the changes the year brought, and what they mean for Colorado's future. What's ahead for the Equal Rights Amendment? Will it become part of the Constitution? Why did the quest for civil rights take such a violent turn this year? We look at Wounded Knee and Denver's crusade for justice. Court-ordered school busing is coming to Denver. What can we expect? War in Israel means pain at the pumps. Can Colorado resources help ease the impact of OPEC's oil embargo? Finally, Inside Out will try and sort out the Watergate scandal. Tonight on Colorado Inside Out.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our look at the news that made 1973 such an amazing year to report about and discuss. My name is Charlie Martin from 630 KHOW Radio. To start the show, let's get a quick take on progress of the Equal Rights Amendment. Last year, 22 states, including Colorado, ratified the constitutional amendment before Phyllis Schlafly's opposition movement began to gain some traction. Another 8 states have ratified this year. 8 additional states are needed for the ERA to become part of the U.S. Constitution. Judy Collins, singer-songwriter, what's your take on the movement of the ERA, and is it going to become a reality in America?
Well, Charlie, first of all, let me thank you so much for having me back to Denver. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I have been working very hard to get the ERA ratified. I was on the cover of Ms. Magazine this year. We are fighting very hard, and we are close. And to see someone like Phyllis Schlafly turn against women, the woman who is a lawyer herself, she has other people take care of her children, to try to cut off the options that we all deserve is heartbreaking. You know, Colorado has ratified it. Fortunately, Colorado is the first state to give women the vote, first state to liberalize abortion. We are leading the way, and women deserve their rights.
Let's continue with Representative Gerald Kopel, a state representative from State District 13. Representative Kopel, what do you think? Do you think the ERA will become constitutional law?
No, I think easily. I voted for it, of course, in the House last year. The people of Colorado, excuse me, added a state constitutional amendment against sex discrimination themselves overwhelmingly in the November election. And I'm sure that this Schlafly woman is sincere, but she represents just sort of an extreme right wing of the Republican Party, sort of the Ronald Reagan type people. And they're not even close to a majority in the Republican Party, let alone in the country. So I don't see any way she can stop this from happening.
Crystal Rose, another performing artist. Some of our viewers may recognize you from your time on Broadway. What do you think of the progress of the ERA?
Thank you, Charlie. It's so nice of you to mention Broadway. It was Hair, by the way, and so thank you very much. Phyllis Schlafly, what is her bag? I mean, my goodness, my women's group, we were just talking about this. This woman is a strange cuckoo. She's a lawyer. She's a politician. She ran for Congress. She's as much a feminist, Judy, as Gloria Steinem. As much a feminist as excuse me, I'm sorry, thank you. Oh, well, absolutely, absolutely. But I think what she wants is she wants to be a feminist for herself. She wants liberation for herself. And Susie Homemaker in the kitchen for the rest of us. And as optimistic as you all are about the ERA, I'm sorry. I think when you look at the United States and you look at the 11 states of the Confederacy, most of those are never going to ratify the ERA. I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen.
Al Nakula, police reporter from the Rocky Mountain News. What do you think? The ERA is 8 states away. Can they make it?
Well, thank you very much, Charlie. And I have to agree with the little lady here. The ERA is not going to pass. This time next year, the only ERA we're talking about is the Denver Bears pitching staff. Which, by the way, reminds me, I could use a hot dog and a beer. Could you get that?
Excuse me?
Oh, never mind. Never mind.
You need your consciousness raised.
Never mind.
1973 is a great year for Pat Schroeder, our first woman congressman ever, and a reminder that Colorado really has something to celebrate in women's history here. Colorado was the first state where men voted to give women the vote in 1893. Now, some people say, wasn't Wyoming first? But in Wyoming, women's suffrage was part of a big constitutional package with a lot of other provisions. So men were voting on the Constitution generally, not just on the single issue of women's suffrage, which was the case here in Colorado, and men voted it. So Colorado becomes the first state where that's done, and Denver, the first big city in the world where women have the vote.
It was in January of 1973 that Pat Schroeder took her seat in Congress, and the guards at the congressional door said they weren't going to let her in. They didn't allow staff in, and she had her babies. And so she began to train them on how the changes were taking place.
The Equal Rights Amendment was background in my life, and it had more of a symbolic meaning than an actual representative meaning. I was very much a part of the generation of women that was starting to think about the fact that we could do anything, and that there really weren't closed doors, provided that we were able to muster the credentials and the chutzpah to go knock on them.
Well, I think it raised everybody's consciousness for the better to say that women can do these things. And one of my goddaughters in North Denver, I was there the day when the post woman came by, and my little goddaughter said, "Oh, I think I'll be a post woman." And so there was sort of an awareness in the atmosphere that these things were happening.
So it was this yeasty time where all rules were changing, and the ERA, the women's movement in Colorado, certainly caught the imagination of an awful lot of our young women, and forever changed the face of Colorado.
I remember always getting to the news to see what was going on, who was doing what, and there were several rallies that were held at the state capitol that some of us Chicanas would go to just to hear what was going on, what were the issues. So while it was, I would say it was more of a secondary issue for us in our community, because we were still struggling to say, do we have first-class citizenship at all, regardless of male or female. But it was very important to several of us younger women who were saying, okay, what could this mean for us? What would it mean for women in their place? And we would have those discussions around Chicanas and Mexicanas and the Crusade for Justice as well.
In some ways, I think to the external culture, there's a real concept, there's a real perception that Latinos or Chicanos or Mexican males had on the patent on sexism, that it's because of the machismo in the society. But I think what we started to examine is really, it causes to examine, was the role that women have historically played within our families in terms of leadership.
In 1973, a number of wives just got very dissatisfied with their husbands and left. we had a guy in the state legislature. His wife went to rabbinical school, and she wasn't gonna stay home and be a housewife anymore.
You know, I grew up in a family with a female head. You know, we live, Latino communities in a lot of ways are matriarchal societies. And those were things that we never really had discussed prior to that time. And that's what those caused us to do. So the feminist movement within the Latino community was really very different. It wasn't about leaving the household. It was about re-examining the home.
Civil rights struggles made many local and national headlines in 1973. A 71-day occupation of Wounded Knee, South Dakota by members of the American Indian movement captured the nation's attention this year. The standoff proved to have a Denver connection when FBI agents claimed that Corky Gonzalez and his Crusade for Justice were supplying arms and other support to AIM members in South Dakota. A St. Patrick's Day confrontation between members of the Crusade and Denver police left Luis Jr. Martinez dead and another 17 people injured, including the 12 police officers. The early morning hours of March 17th were also rocked by an explosion in an apartment building next to the headquarters of the Crusade for Justice organization. Police have blamed the activists for the explosion, but Gonzalez insists that police have thrown the grenades. Judy, as you look at this, we have issues in Wounded Knee, issues here in Denver. What do you think's going on?
Well, I think what's going on is now America is reaping the whirlwind. We sowed this by the unjust imperialist war that we have waged for so long in Southeast Asia. You know, my career started really singing a lot of these protest songs in Greenwich Village, protesting with people, protesting during the early 60s, the late 60s, the war effort. And we were talking about what America was doing overseas, but what America has been doing to its own people is every bit as horrifying. So it is not a surprise that people now are rising up in this country and complain. You know, I actually testified at the Chicago 7 trial, so you might recall just how poorly the police behaved in Chicago, and no reason to assume they were going to behave any better here in Denver. But I did go testify. I wasn't in Chicago during the Democratic National Convention, but I had earlier met with the Yippies, and I was called on to testify. And in fact, what I did was, this was my testimony. Where have all the flowers gone? But Judge Hoffman did not allow me to sing any further. Anyway, in any case, I would say I'm not spending much time in Denver these days, but what has happened here is exactly what the Denver establishment deserves for putting minorities down.
Well, I don't see how that testimony would have been refuted. It's very compelling to me. But let's get another topic. Let's get another take here. Representative Copel, you're a lawmaker. You know, with all these things going on, are we going to have to pass some laws to address what's going on in our cities, and especially for passing arms back and forth?
Well, what I just don't understand is we have been passing lots of laws to make things better. You know, you had the Watts riots in Los Angeles that sort of started this whole thing in 1965, just a few days, really, after the Voting Rights Act was passed. And we've been making much progress in passing good laws and addressing some of the problems that Judy Collins is talking about, but we're reforming things now. If this had been, I don't know, 1910, and people were rioting when they didn't have any chance, I just don't get why people aren't working within the system when really the system is working so well, and we've made so much progress in the last 10 years.
Crystal, what do you think about that? Have we been making some progress, or where is all this going to lead?
I'm sorry. Representative Copel, you just don't get the scene. You don't get the scene. Colorado has passed, during the 1950s, our wonderful state passed so many civil rights laws. Then you have Congress coming up and passing the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. But those are laws. You got to look into people's reality. And the reality is, in Denver, and I did grow up in Denver, you know, in Denver you had blacks and you had Chicanos who are living in North Side ghettos and going to the crappy schools. And so you have young folks who are mad, and when you mix in those agent provocateurs, you know those, and when you mix in snitches, and when you mix in suspected snitches, and you mix in just bad fuzz, cops, when you mix in bad cops, you're going to get an explosion. We shouldn't be surprised.
Well, speaking of cops, Al, what do you think is going to be the response? I mean, 17 police officers or 12 police officers injured. That's a big deal. I got to believe that was a major deal for the Denver Police Department.
Well, you know, Charlie, I was out there that night, and of course, St. Patrick's Day, during the day, they had enough trouble with the Irishmen. But now, out there on Downing Street, I'll tell you what, people were jaywalking right and left. and you can't have that. You got to have order. Big party going on, people jaywalking. Suddenly, some people protest. We don't want, you're not arresting me. They start running, shots get fired. And I'll tell you what, I don't believe Corky when he says that the Denver police threw grenades, because if they had thrown grenades, it would have been the wrong apartment.
Yeah, you
Charlie,
never know with that. Sure,
can
Krista,
I
go
say
ahead. Yeah.
something? 10 years ago, Denver cops were stealing everything out of stores and out of
I wrote
houses.
about it.
I know you did, Al. So what's wrong with you? If they could steal 10 years earlier, why couldn't they throw a grenade?
That it's, you know, if you looked at that arsenal that they took out of that place, and you believe that Denver had to stage anything with what they had in there, you're kidding yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You got to chill,
well,
as the young people say.
I have heard that. I have heard that.
The Crusade for Justice was one of many organizations across the country that were under constant surveillance by the then FBI COINTELPRO program. And part of what ratcheted that up in the 73 was our support and our alliance with the American Indian movement and their takeover of Wounded Knee. We felt it was important to support the American Indian movement and Indian people in their right to self-determination. And so Wounded Knee was that action that we supported. And when I say we supported, we organized rallies and marches to bring to the attention of the general populace the plight of the American Indian and also why they had to take the action they took.
I think the role of COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, and the FBI infiltration has not really been discussed.
As a result of that, we knew there was, on 3/15/73, we got copies of a telegram that instructed local FBI offices to, if they could not stop groups and arrest them and hold them that were supportive of Wounded Knee, that they were to put them under 24-hour surveillance. And we knew that was happening with the Crusade for Justice because of that. Now, that doesn't mean that there were not other issues that would put us in the sight of the FBI and the local police department, but clearly in that time period, that was a major issue.
If we look at the Crusade for Justice and who were they challenging the most? They were challenging the police department. That would alone make you a little paranoid, make things a little bit difficult to operate.
And Corky Gonzalez is a very, very hard person to evaluate in Colorado's history because, change takes militant people. And Corky was a militant person.
To me, there's a conversation about how desperate people were for social change to happen, but also how vulnerable they were.
So March 17th was a turning point for both Escuela and the Crusade in that it made us, you hear the rhetoric of, I'm willing to put my life on the line for human rights because I believe in this, and quite frankly, the Crusade for Justice put lives on the line because we decided to take a stand to support the American Indian movement.
Luis Martinez, of course, is killed, that teenager who taught, I think it was dance and music at the school, and something like 10 cops were injured. I mean, the cops had more injuries there than the Hispanics involved because there was a lot of fire from surrounding buildings that knocked out quite a few cops.
Luis Jr. Martinez, who was a major and important, critical young leader in the Crusade, had watched as police stopped jaywalkers across the street, walked across to see what was going on, and what ensued is the police began firing and backed him into the alley. What happened in that alley? Only Luis and the officer that went back there with him know. But we do know that then instigated the assault on the Crusade for Justice residential building, ended up and most everyone being arrested there, people being charged. They even said we had weapons, and then in the court trial that ensued, they showed that the weapons were the ballet folklorical's props for a dance, and that's what they used. They claimed that we had explosives that resulted in the building exploding, which was our daycare center area. We countered that, no, that was something the police launched into the building. And as I said, at the end of it all, only one person was convicted of any of the charges.
So my sense is that I don't know, what took place on the progressive side, and I really don't know what took place on the repressive side. My sense is that there was a combination of the two things that caused those things to happen.
What I absolutely remember was my dad's view that to have a successful constitutional democracy, there had to be opportunity for everyone. There had to be inclusion. We had to get past our history of exclusion and our history of failure to honor diversity.
The poor people, the bottom of the stack here was the poor Hispanics moving in. So they had much more right, or much more reason to object and to push for rights, and suffered more discrimination in many ways.
The Democrats quit taking the Hispanic citizens for granted. Before that, there was said, oh yeah, well, you'll have a chance to run sometime, but that never happened. After that, you began to see the Democrats begin to take Hispanic candidates a lot more seriously and helping them get elected and come to the table.
We have not really done an examination of a lot of the things that happened that brought a lot of factions of the movement to a halt. The Black Panther movement was effectively destroyed because the leadership was killed or placed in jail. If we examine any of the violent interactions that took place during that time period, we ended up on the losing end of those interactions.
To this day, we honor Luis Jr. Martinez. To this day, on March 17th, in this very building at Escuela Tlatelolco, we pack it with our community. We do community commemoration. People come from different places here throughout the years that's happened, and we remind our young people that there was someone that stood up and lost their life, so they might be in a better place today.
Well, let's get on with the program with our second topic tonight. On June 21st of this year, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Denver Public Schools Board of Education had indeed pursued a deliberate policy of segregation and ordered DPS to begin busing students next year to redress the racial imbalance in Denver schools. Representative Copel, this was a major thing. I mean, the Denver Public Schools and the U.S. Supreme Court. What do you think this decision, what the impact do you think this decision will make in Denver?
Well, this unanimous Supreme Court decision is another good example of how working within the system really does work. That case, Keys versus School District Number 1, was brought with the lead plaintiffs, my good friends Jerry and Jim Keys. And it's a huge breakthrough because it's the first time you don't have a situation where, like in Charlotte, North Carolina, the schools had been officially segregated by saying this is the black school and this is the white school. What the Denver School Board had done was something much more subtle, which is just in the way they drew the attendance boundaries and where they placed the new school construction. They did that in a way they deliberately knew and intended would have schools that were, one school would be mostly black, the other school would be mostly white, whereas if they'd put the school in a different place, drawing from two neighborhoods, it would have been more integrated. So I know there's the whole George Wallace crowd with no busing for us, and they're just against this because they're bad people and they're racists. But I know that there's other people who just, they like their kids going to the school 3 blocks away and don't want to have the kid riding a bus 45 minutes each way. I understand that, but my kids go to Grayland. They ride a bus every day. A lot of kids who go to Grayland come from way in South Denver or the suburbs. They have a pretty long bus ride. So I think it's okay to take a bus trip to help a good education.
Crystal, now I think you're a product of DPS, right?
Yes,
so
I am.
What's your take on this? I mean, this was a big deal and obviously made headlines across the nation.
Oh, absolutely, and it's about time. I mean, really, 20, 25 years ago, black parents, African-American parents in what we used to call East Denver, They were protesting. It made the papers. Al, for all I know, you might have written about it, but not much happened. And so now we have this. But I got to tell you, I'm sorry, despite my normally sunny nature, I am not hopeful. I am not hopeful at all. You have white folks who are, boy, those for sale signs are popping up like seeds in Haight-Ashbury, to tell you the truth. They're just, and the folks are leaving. And soon, I predict, give it 10, give it 15 years, DPS is going to be mostly black and Chicano. And I don't think their quality of education is going to improve.
Wow. Al, you're a veteran of the city. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, Crystal brought it up. Do you think those for sale signs are going to mean, is this going to mean a big boom for the suburbs?
Well, I'll tell you what, the suburbs are booming, and part of it is because Denver is growing and Denver is annexing. And when Denver annexes as a city and county, so does the school district grow. And as it goes farther southeast and southwest, they can move, but we're going to come and get them. Denver's going to grow, and it's going to keep growing. It's one of those new western cities. And yes, there's been a lot of segregation in neighborhoods in Denver, and the representative is exactly correct. It was de facto segregation, and that's the reason that Denver is the first city outside the South to face forced school busing. So as we annex out into the suburbs, I think what you're going to find is there's going to be more balance. It's not just going to be the blacks and the Hispanics. There's going to be plenty of white students to bus.
Judy, you've had experience all across the nation. Do you think this decision is going to bring everyone together?
It's certainly going to help, because little black children, little Chicano children, they deserve the same opportunities that white students have. You know, I'm a graduate of East High, class of 57, go Angels, and I was lucky enough to go to an integrated school. We didn't need to have the busing. You know, Park Hill in Denver was one of the very first integrated communities in the entire country in the 50s. So we benefited. Our East High School will go down as a legendary high school. It was a lovely place to go to school. We all worked together. That's the kind of spirit we should be able to have. And if it takes busing to make it work, then busing it will be.
Well, we'll have to wait to see if busing's the solution in Denver. Who knows?
The first outside of the South busing order that the Supreme Court gave to the United States was in Denver here. And that's because the school board, and this shows you how important school board races are, and you got to get good people in there who aren't going to do things like this. Every time black people moved into Park Hill, school board, well, let's just adjust this boundary here so that African American kids go here and the Anglos can go over there. Those were the decisions that caused this court, the Supreme Court, to put Denver under a busing order, which really infuriated a lot of the people, made a lot of fear in the community.
What that was all about, in the broadest sense, was the constitutional role of the courts in a democracy. The times when courts have to weigh in order to enforce mandates. And I do remember there was a great deal of controversy about that, about the appropriateness of the court undertaking that role, not necessarily the appropriateness of the ultimate outcomes, but the appropriateness of the courts in that mix.
Well, I was in the state legislature at the time, and I supported the decision. I have, over the years, become very disillusioned with that decision because you see the white flight that it did entail, and the sort of the ghettoization, which is now being reversed, or has been reversed a lot of ways, as more and more young people and retired people are moving back into Denver. But the immediate cause of that decision was to lose an awful lot of people to the suburbs, and I think make the educational challenge of Colorado more difficult.
We were kind of an afterthought later on, but it did impact our communities because we were talking about busing our youngsters from East Denver to TJ, you know, Thomas Jefferson, and busing them to George Washington. And from our communities, that was very foreign to us. While we absolutely supported the idea of our youngsters having the equal opportunity to access and to quality educational opportunities, we were not convinced that busing was a way to do that.
I can remember that very well here in Montclair, just south of, I live in the Montclair neighborhood, just south of Park Hill. All of a sudden, people were moving out. And there was a mass exodus of people with kids going out to Arapahoe County or Douglas County. They didn't want their kids bused from Montclair or Park Hill or Cherry Creek or University Park over to North Denver to what was regarded as inferior black schools. So it was a time when the city was losing a lot of families to the suburbs who didn't want to go through this, who liked the idea of neighborhood schools.
Busing, in the long run, opened up avenues for education for our community. And education in that generation, that Chicano generation, was the first generation where education became an avenue for social mobility.
Anti-busing candidates won every slot in the school board for years thereafter, and actually running on a mistruth that they could do something about a court order from the United States Supreme Court. The Lord himself could hardly interfere with that, and yet they were running on that fear. It was a great time of fear, and one of my opponents in North Denver there had an ad in the North Denver Tribune, "Don't vote for that Gallagher. He's part of the Thule Barnes Pasco Benton busing bunch." What do you think about that?
Topic 3, an October conflict between Israel and Egyptian and Syrian forces had a lasting impact on people here in the States. OPEC has retaliated against the U.S. and other supporters of Israel by enacting an oil embargo. The embargo is causing fuel shortages, long lines at the pump, and a 10-gallon purchase limit. Prices as high as $1.05, that's 3 times the regular rate of 35 cents a gallon, have been seen around town. I can attest to that one. Colorado Governor John Vanderhoof has issued executive orders for state employees to carpool, drive under 50 miles per hour, and turn off the air conditioning. The governor is also using the oil crisis to promote alternative energies, such as oil shale, nuclear, and solar power. Crystal Rose, as you look at this, what do you think is going to be the impact of this gas shortage? I mean, are people going to start riding their bikes everywhere? Are we going to start having different kinds of cars? I mean, is there a solution?
I only wish we could get the power of the federal government behind alternative energies. Again, my women's group, we've been discussing this and looking at the idea of using the sun. I believed you called it solar energy. Absolutely, because this fight, our interest in the Middle East, face it, it's about oil. It's all about oil. At the same time, why are we going to tear apart our state? Why are we going to tear up our mountains? We're going to tear up our plateaus. We're going to tear up our environment just to feed our oil fix? I say we've got to let the sun shine in. Excuse me. Judy? Let the sun shine. Let the sun shine in.
You did say you run hair.
Shine in. Excuse me, Charlie. I just had to.
Any veteran
we
of
cannot
any veteran of hair on Broadway's got to go break into it. So absolutely no problem, Chris.
Thank you for that promo.
Al, what do you think? I mean, we're fresh off our involvement in Vietnam. Are we going to be sending troops over to Israel to solve this conflict, or is there any solution here in the States to this oil problem?
Oh, it's right here. It's right here, Charlie. And the little lady here is right. And the girls group that she has talking about energy. But I'll tell you what, it's not just solar. Right here in Colorado, we have plenty of oil and natural gas reserves. And the man, to use your jargon, is getting involved because just this year, the Rio Blanco project, U.S. Atomic Energy Commission set off 3 nukes down under Rio Blanco County to try to dislodge natural gas deposits. I think we can be energy self-sufficient. We don't need that Middle East oil. We can get it right here in Colorado. And we got plenty of, we can explode more nukes under the plateaus, dislodge the oil and the natural gas, and we'll be on our way to self-sufficiency.
Maybe Rio Blanco's going to have a different nickname once they start glowing in the dark with all those nuclear tests going on. Who knows?
Tres Blanco.
There you go. So, Judy, what do you think? I mean, this people have to drive, and people have cars all throughout Denver and Colorado. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I can't get behind Mr. Nakula's idea of the nuclear power, but I can maybe for the only time I've ever agreed with this White House, congratulate them on taking Governor John Love to be the first energy czar to really look at this problem. I think we could do more things like carpool. Here I live in New York now most of the time, where you have public transportation, but here people could share cars more. You have most people in big gas guzzling cars. And as we've seen, people are interested in helping save the environment. That first Earth Day was incredibly successful. We need to recycle, we need to preserve a lot of our energy.
Representative Copel, do you think we can preserve our energy without some laws telling us to do so?
Well, I think we're going to, first of all, there is this huge amount of oil shale on the west slope, and I think whether we like it or not, towns like Parachute are within a few years going to have a population of 200,000 or more with that energy boom that's coming for sure here. But I think in terms of better transportation, people are talking about creating something called a regional transportation district, not just for Denver, but to include the suburbs. And it's going to be fantastic. They're going to have these sort of people mover cars, like the monorail at Disneyland, but they'll come just as one single car, so you'll never have to wait more than a couple minutes for one of these cars to come and take you exactly where you want to go on a monorail fixed transit system. And they're talking about having a tax increase election for this soon, and if the people vote for it, we'll be having this all over the Denver area, built, completed, done before 1980.
I don't know, Representative Cole, that sounds a little Flash Gordon to me, but who knows? I mean, stranger things have happened, right?
I do remember how outraged we were when gas went over $1. How we would drive around town and looking for the 99-cent a gallon sale.
I don't think we changed our habits near as much. We lowered our speed limit, but I don't think we actually lowered the speed in which most of us drove. You're used to driving at 65 or 70. To lower it down to 55 is really difficult. But Johnny Vanderhoof did what was necessary, and I think in Colorado probably was more compliant than a lot of other states.
Well, I have to be honest. It really didn't impact me the same way as it may others, because in our community we were poor enough that we carpooled anyway, and we did not always have cars. That was a luxury for many of us.
More and more get an idea that your destiny was tied up into large forces that you didn't particularly understand, that things were happening, whether it was a war in Southeast Asia or whether or not it was an oil embargo. There was a certain loss of self-sufficiency that I remember starting around that time.
Two takeaways I have from it is clearly that was the beginning. That was the beginning of people in the United States beginning to say, wait a minute, we're connected to something that's bigger. This thing that's happening all the way across the country, even though the 67 war kind of came and went, and we stood on the sidelines, and we were like, okay, good, Israel's in, we don't have to worry. But it was really a conversation about how the world dynamics was changing, which we're dealing with 40 years later. The other thing that we're still dealing with is, and I think it really plays itself out, because it was the first attack on consumerism. It really was how we started flexing our muscles as consumers, because that's what we want here in the United States. We want stuff. You can do anything to us. You can do almost anything to us. You can blow up a country where people will die, but do not inconvenience us here.
America has always had a special deal on gas. I remember when I went to Ireland to visit my cousins for the first time, and they were paying like $5 a gallon, and here we are over in America with our $1.35 or whatever it was, and they said, well, we have cars that don't eat up a lot of gas like you Americans do. So I think, in a way, it shows you crooked indeed are the straight lines of the Lord, where out of difficulty can come some new consciousness on driving, and there was a lot more people now riding their bicycles. It's a lot more higher in consciousness.
So in June, My dad moved back to D.C. He became part of the Nixon White House. Parenthetically, I had a little cubbyhole of an office with 2 other White House interns, and his office was at the old executive office building down the hall and on a corner, but we were in the same building. And so I was more aware then of what was going on from the national perspective. He came to that position because he thought the energy crisis was one of the most important issues facing the country. He thought if we didn't figure out how to deal with energy independence, that our security and our economy were at great risk.
I remember John Love well, and I worked with a student to do the biography of John Love, who was a delightful guy with a great sense of humor and humility. I asked him what was that like being there in the White House as in the Nixon administration as Secretary, the first czar, as they called it, the first Secretary of Energy. And he said, I felt a little bit like the piano player in a whorehouse. I just made music downstairs and I wasn't too sure what was going on upstairs.
He was indeed advocating for the notion that we were in an energy crisis. We needed to look thoughtfully at rationing. We needed to begin to look at solutions on a 5- and 10-year basis. And he started talking about that in the summer of '73. The White House didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to give that level of credence to the problem. It had all sorts of economic implications. My dad was at odds with George Shultz on these issues. The embargo hit. My dad's view was that that was the crisis that you didn't want to waste, that it should have been used as the platform to develop a really thoughtful energy policy that had all of these various components. The White House was still not in that posture, and if you remember, Watergate was then in full swing.
I think in a way, in the long term, it pushed the environmental agenda and the idea of saving gas, of walking, of bicycling, of not using so much in the way of fossil fuels. And this was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people. There is a limited supply of fossil fuels, of gasoline, and maybe you ought to start thinking about alternative transportation.
Whatever our solutions in '73 were not near equal to the magnitude of the problem, and I think to this day we underrate how difficult it is to change the oil-based economy.
All right, let's get a quick take on this topic 4. 1973 may well be remembered as the year it seemed like all the president's men might fall into disgrace. The revelation of secretly recorded meetings in the Oval Office led to a fight to force the president to release the tapes. When the tapes were finally released, an 18.5-minute gap on one recording was discovered. The president held a press conference in November to address the controversy. Let's take a look at what he said.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes. But in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Al Nakula from the Rocky Mountain News. Those are strong words. I'm not a crook. I'm not sure if I've ever thought the president's a crook. What do you think?
He's a crook. He's out of there, and it's a good thing he got rid of Agnew. He's a crook too. We're going to have Gerald Ford as president within the year. You mark my words.
Those are
good man, trusted by both parties.
Wow, those are strong words. I can't even remember a time we've ever seen
18.5 minutes. Come on, Charlie. Come
yeah,
on.
But I mean,
did you see that picture of Rosemary Woods? She looked like a contortionist. Say, well, here's how it might have happened.
Well,
yeah,
the secretary, or was it, Alexander Haig said it could have been they said maybe a devious or a mysterious force. You never know. Judy, what do you think?
This mysterious force.
I see. All right.
Mysterious
we've got about 2 minutes left to talk about this. So, what do you think is going to happen with President Nixon?
Well, you know, he may not be a crook, but he's definitely a warmonger, so I would like to see him go. There's this new little song I'm singing these days called Send in the Clowns, and I think that song title also would work very well with the White House.
Certainly with all the people leaving in disgrace this year, I can see that. That might be a good song. I like that idea. Representative Copel, what do you think?
Well, he ran this campaign in '68 of being the unifier, bring us together, and yet it turns out he's what a lot of us saw all along. He's this very paranoid man with an intense hatred of his political enemies. He's been illegally spying on the press and on people who disagree with him, burglarizing the psychiatrist's records of a whistleblower, obstructing justice right and left. And the good thing is there's a lot of Republicans, responsible Republicans like Senator Howard Baker of Tennessee, who are not thinking about this in a partisan way. They're saying the president is a criminal. He's undermining the Constitution all over the place. Also got us into an illegal war in Cambodia, which whatever you say about it on the war fighting, it was illegal, violated the Constitution. And I hope Mr. Nakula is right. It would be great if he were impeached.
Wow, Crystal, we are talking about some serious stuff here. An impeached president. I don't even know if that's ever happened before. I mean, that'd be kind of crazy. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, Charlie, even I know that a president has been impeached before.
Wow, we've gotten rid of a president? When did that happen?
Well, they've been impeached. I don't think you got rid of him.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay.
I took history in DPS, so yeah, who knows? Go ahead.
Or, well, actually, I'm not sure. I'll have to get back to you on that. But in any event, Tricky Dick is a crook. He was a crook in 1952 with that silly Checkers speech, and he's a crook now. He's also a liar and a war criminal. He is not going to escape his funky karma this time. I think you're right. If I was him, I would head for San Clemente pronto.
Funky karma indeed.
Well, my memory of Watergate is the fact that it elected me governor. This was a Republican state. It had been a Republican state for a long time. And the idea that Watergate came along and made people even more cynical. So you had that Watergate came on top of, 3 assassinations, 2 Kennedys and a king. It came on top of the Vietnam War, and then all of a sudden, you had Watergate.
Well, Richard Nixon was no friend of mine, no friend of the Chicano movement, no friend of working class people.
And the fact that the highest people in the line, Ehrlichman and Haldeman, were lying to us and resigned in '73, as I remember. And again, it just added to this whole nihilism, and people were willing to give me a chance to walk the state. I mean, I did not have any money to run to office. I did not have I did not have wealthy backers, but I really rode Watergate and the feeling of the time into office because people were open to change and cynical about government.
My personal memory about all of this is that I was sitting in my boss's office in the old executive office building, and we were watching the Watergate hearings on the television when Alexander Butterfield testified that there were tapes in the Oval Office. And there was almost a palpable sense across the entire building of, oh my gosh, what did I say? What did somebody else say? All of it is recorded, and I didn't know it was recorded. So then events really started to unfold and things unraveled.
1973 and Watergate create a much deeper cynicism about politics, that you can't trust either party. And a lot of Coloradans had voted for Nixon and were disappointed with this. And there are people now that don't vote at all. You know, that slogan, don't vote for him, it only encourages them, which is sad to see. And now we only get, even in a presidential election, something like 50% of the voters turn out. And that's unfortunate, representing a kind of a disillusionment with politics generally, which is only deepening, it seems, in current days.
So the first memory I have is that before he accepted the job at the Nixon White House, he had a meeting with the president, and he asked the president about Watergate. And the president assured him that he had no knowledge and he was not involved. So my dad, who was an extremely ethical man, viewed that as the first threshold that he needed to pass in order to decide whether he was going back to the White House. And parenthetically, for any of your viewers who knew my mother did not want him to go. My mother did not like President Nixon. And for her, it was a very personal kind of a thing. She didn't trust him. My dad's view was that the nation was calling and that this was a real energy crisis and that he had to be part of the solution. So there was some familial discord around Watergate and around my dad's decision to go.
I would say that Richard Nixon's demise really attacked, really opened up exposed the weaknesses in that U.S. mythology of the country that was, that shining city on the hill, all that stuff that Ronald Reagan reacted to, right? Because that's what he came back with. That was his whole thing, is that it's morning in America. We got to think positive of ourselves. We got to think good about ourselves. But for us, this is something we had been articulating for quite some time, and so it was only that affirmation of what many of us believed to be true. We just didn't know how bad it was.
Our role as interns, I realized, had no future, and that's the point at which I decided maybe I'd better consider driving my little car back across the country and starting law school that fall rather than waiting a year, because I didn't think I was going to have a job going forward.
In 1973, The Exorcist, the movie, came out, and a bunch of us from the faculty at Regis went together with Father Ed McGinnis, a famous, renowned Jesuit theologian. We got to talking about Watergate at this, as I recall, too. Or maybe it was separately, I can't remember exactly, but he came up with a wonderful quatrain that helped us keep straight all the criminals in the Watergate. And he made this up. It's to the tune of Pony Boy, and I'm going to sing it for you. It's not everybody that will do this from the city here, but I'm going to. And this is Father Ed McGinnis, Jesuit, Regis theologian, Regis University, and it goes like this. Watergate, Watergate, have you heard of Watergate? Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, Stanson, Dean, weave the word from McCord, Jeb Magruder too. Liddy up, liddy up, liddy up, go. Nixon is clean. And that was his way of keeping straight all the culprits. I think it's a great quatrain.
All right. Well, let's get to our favorite time of the show. You know it's best. It's our disgrace of the year, since we're talking about 1973. Judy, start us off. What's your disgrace of the year?
I would really like to go back. It's the disgrace of the decade, but it may be coming to a close now, finally. The long-running conflict in Southeast Asia, the secret war in Cambodia, what we have done to Vietnam. Truly the only thing that came out of this was the rise of consciousness, the protests, and some beautiful folk songs. But otherwise, America has not done itself any favors by that long, horrifying conflict that took so many young American lives.
Representative Copel, what's your disgrace of the year?
The cowardly European governments who, after the Arabs put on the oil embargo, the Europeans immediately caved and switched sides. So instead of being on the side of democratic Israel, they're now on the side of the Arab dictatorships.
Wow. Crystal, what do you think?
I have to say our erstwhile vice president, Spiro Agnew, he's a nattering nabob of hypocrisy. He's just another crook. Good riddance.
Al, wrap it up for us. Disgrace of the year.
Well, I was going to change it to Funky Karma, but I'm going to stick with my original, which is Dick Lamb thinking he's going to be governor. Come on. As is the guy that cost us our Olympics, helped cost us our Olympics, helped bring abortion on demand to Colorado. Now he's walking the state. I don't think he can run it.
We'll have to wait and see. It'll be a fun election next year.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is always the hardest part, but also a lot of fun. Say something nice about somebody that happened this year.
Well, I'd like to say Dick Lamb, just to counter him. What a supporter he's been of women's rights. Good for getting rid of the Olympics. But I also want to congratulate another young politician, Pat Schroeder, elected last year to the House. She took office for the first time this year. I think she'll have a long career. Good for her. She's a young mother, but she's willing to step up and do her job.
And let's just also remember, Tom Farley from Pueblo is also running for the Democratic nomination for governor, and he or Lamb would be a good governor, I think. The best thing this year was the Broncos, the first winning season in history, 7-5-2.
I think owner Phipps should be definitely credited for that. Crystal, what's your Say Something Nice?
Well, you know, this law professor, I believe she's from Columbia, but her name is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she's heading up the new women's project of the ACLU. She is going to do good stuff. My women's group, we are going to stay with Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Well, how about that? Well, I got another gal for my Say Something Nice, and that's Rebecca Ann King of Denver, the new Miss America for this year, right from Denver. And there's something that women ought to be proud of and devote their attention to. Miss America from Denver.
There you go. Who'd thunk it? Well, I want to say something nice about all my trivia buddies playing every Friday night at Papa Rocks. We'll see you this Friday, definitely. Looking forward to that. Well, that is all the time we have for Colorado Inside Out this evening. Thanks for joining us in our look at 1973. Be sure to catch me every day on 630 KHOW. Thank you for tuning in. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Charlie Martin. Good night.